The freight station called Umber Reach hung in the dark like a lantern nobody trusted, and the smallest passenger aboard it was a girl the crew had already decided not to fear. Her name was Wren Calloway, and she was 17 standard years old, which the aliens who ran the station could not quite make sense of, because 17 years was nothing. It was a blink. It was the time it took a Velthi drone to reach adulthood twice over. And yet here she was, human, unfinished, small in the shoulders, with a band of dull gray metal clamped around her left forearm from wrist to elbow, and everyone who looked at that band drew the same conclusion. The conclusion was that she was broken. The band was called a regulator, though the humans who wore them used older, plainer words when the aliens were not listening. It hummed faintly against her skin, warm as a sleeping animal, and it was the first thing anyone noticed about her. On a station where every other species walked in on legs built for their own worlds, the tall, reed-limbed Asani, the low, armored Grell, the Velthi with their glassy wing cases folded flat down their backs, a human already looked strange. A human with a medical brace looked pitiable. So they pitied her. Quietly, the way you pity a thing you are also a little relieved to be stronger than. "Careful with the crates, small one," said Dockmaster Aller on her first morning, watching her lift a supply container that came up to her chest. He said it kindly. He was an Asani, 3 meters of pale, jointed limbs and enormous liquid eyes, and kindness cost him nothing. "The gravity here is heavier than your homeworld. We would not want you to strain the arm further." Wren set the container down on the sorting rail. She had lifted it without effort, but she was careful never to let that show, and so she let her breath go out in a small performed puff, as if the weight had been real to her. "Thank you," she said. "I'll be careful." Aller's eyes crinkled with satisfaction. He liked being kind to fragile things. Most of the station did. It made them feel large. What none of them understood, what the regulator on her arm existed precisely to keep them from understanding, was that Umber Reach's heavier gravity felt to Wren like wading in a shallow, warm pool. It was pleasant. It was almost nothing. Her homeworld was not lighter than this station. Her homeworld would have folded most of these people into the dirt and left them there. But you did not say such things. That was the first rule they taught you before they ever let you off the surface, before the regulator went on your arm and the recruiters shook your parents' hands. You did not tell the galaxy what you were. You let them decide for themselves, and you let them decide small, because a galaxy that believed humans were fragile was a galaxy that slept easily beside them, and a galaxy that slept easily was a galaxy that did not go looking for reasons to be afraid. Wren had grown up on those rules, the way other children grew up on lullabies. Umber Reach was a sorting station, a junction where cargo from a dozen systems came apart and was put back together for onward routes. It was not important. Important stations had defenses, garrisons, names people recognized. Umber Reach had a skeleton crew of maybe 200 souls across 9 species, a single tired security detail, and a reputation for being so far off the raider lanes that nobody bothered to fortify it. It was the sort of place they sent a human girl to learn the trade without doing any harm. Wren had been assigned there as a cargo hand under a labor exchange treaty that she did not fully understand, and that her mother had signed with a shaking hand and dry eyes. Humans were new to the assembly of worlds, new enough that most member species had never met one, new enough that the treaties governing them were thin and cautious and full of clauses about supervision. A human could work. A human could travel. A human could not, under any circumstance the assembly could imagine, be trusted to walk around without something on their body that proved they had agreed to hold themselves in check. That was what the regulator was officially, a compliance device, a visible promise. It monitored her vitals and reported them to the Assembly's registry, and it applied, the paperwork said, graduated physiological dampening in accordance with interspecies safety norms. The aliens read that phrase and understood it to mean the human was sick and the machine was helping her stay alive. The humans read the same phrase and understood exactly what it meant, which was a leash. The dampening was real. That was the part the aliens had right and did not know they had right. The band did not keep Wren alive. It held her down. It throttled the current in her nerves, softened the recoil in her muscles, dulled the razor speed of her reflexes to something a Grell could track with its slow, flat eyes. It made her, deliberately, into the creature they thought she was. Take it off, and the pool she was wading through would drain away all at once, and she would be standing on dry land in her full weight for the first time in front of people who had never once, not for a moment, imagined what that would look like. She never took it off. That was the deal. You wore the band and you stayed small, and in exchange the galaxy let your people out of the gravity well one careful step at a time. She was very good at staying small. There was one person on Umber Reach who was not kind to her, and Wren found that she trusted him more than all the rest. His name was Sarek. He was Grell, squat, gray-plated, built like a boulder that had learned to resent things, and he ran the third shift loading floor with a temper that the whole station gave a wide berth. On Wren's second day, he watched her stack containers for an hour without saying a word, then walked over and stood in front of her with his 4 thick arms crossed. "You move wrong," he said. Wren blinked. "I'm sorry." "You move wrong for a weak thing." His voice was a low grind like gravel in a barrel. "Weak things brace before they lift. They lean into the load. You don't. You pick it up like it isn't there, and then you remember to pretend, half a second late every time." He tilted his heavy head. "I've watched a lot of things pretend to be weaker than they are. Usually before they eat something." For one cold instant Wren's whole body went still, and the regulator on her arm registered the spike in her heart rate and dutifully reported it to a registry 100 light-years away, where nobody was watching. Then she made herself laugh, a small, tired human laugh. "I brace on the inside," she said. "The arm. The doctor said not to strain it, so I do the work from my legs and my back. It probably does look strange." Sarek looked at her for a long, long moment. "Sure," he said finally. "The arm." And he turned and went back to his station, and he never mentioned it again, and Wren understood that he had not believed a word of it and had decided, for reasons of his own, to let her have the lie. After that he was rude to her constantly, which was how she knew he had made up his mind to protect her. He barked at her to work faster, called her clumsy in front of the others, made a great show of never once treating her as fragile, and by doing so he became the only person on the station who ever accidentally treated her as real. She started taking her rest breaks near his station. He pretended not to notice. Sometimes he left a portion of his own ration bar on the rail where she would find it, and when she thanked him he told her it was garbage he hadn't wanted, and they both knew that was a lie too. The rest of the station went on pitying her, and she went on letting them, and the weeks folded one into the next. The trouble came in on a routine transit ping 41 days after she arrived. Wren was on the sorting floor when the station's tone changed, a subtle thing, a shift in the hum of the air recyclers as power quietly rerouted, the kind of change most of the crew never felt. She felt it. The regulator dulled her body, but it could not entirely dull the animal underneath, and the animal underneath had grown up on a world where you noticed the moment the birds stopped singing, because on her world the moment the birds stopped singing was the last moment you got. She looked up. Across the floor, Sarek had gone still too, one massive hand flat against the deck plating. "Feel that?" he said, not a question. "Yes," she said. A ship had docked that was not on the schedule, then another. The station's public channel stayed cheerful and unbothered, routing chatter and cargo manifests, but underneath it the deck told a different story to anyone with the body to hear it. Heavy footfalls, too many of them, moving with the loose, fast rhythm of people who did not care about breaking things. Then the lights on the loading floor turned the color of old blood, and Dockmaster Aller's voice came over the channel, and it was not kind anymore. It was thin and high and terrified. "All personnel," Aller said. "All personnel, there are armed persons on the concourse. They have please, everyone remain calm and remain where you." The channel cut out. For a moment the whole loading floor stood frozen, 40 workers of 6 species looking at each other in the red light, and then somebody made the small broken sound that a crowd makes just before it panics. Sarek moved first. He crossed the floor in 3 heavy strides and put himself between the workers and the main hatch, all 4 arms spread wide, and roared a single word in his own language that the translators rendered flatly as DOWN. And the workers went down, dropping behind the cargo rails, because when a Grell tells you to get down, you have already been getting down for a full second before your mind catches up. Wren did not go down. She stood in the middle of the floor in the red light with the regulator warm on her arm, and she looked at the main hatch, and she began, very quietly, to do arithmetic. The people who came through the hatch called themselves the Thorn, though later Wren would learn they had a dozen names across a dozen systems, and all of them meant the same thing, which was people who took what they wanted from places too small to stop them. There were 9 of them, she counted as they came. They were a mix, mostly a species she didn't recognize, tall and sinewy, with a second pair of vestigial arms folded against their ribs, and 2 hulking mercenaries of some heavy world or stock, and one at the center who did not carry a weapon and did not need to, because everything about the way the others arranged themselves around her said that she was the reason to be afraid. Their leader was called Vash. She was elegant in the way a blade is elegant, narrow, unhurried, dressed in dark layered armor that had clearly been expensive and clearly been used. She walked onto the loading floor as if she owned it, which, functionally, for the next several hours she did. "Please," Vash said, and her voice through the translator was almost gentle. "There's no need for anyone to be brave. Bravery is how people get hurt in situations like this, and I would so much rather no one got hurt." She spread her hands. "We're here for the reactor core. Umber Reach runs on a 4th-generation containment cell that is worth more than this entire station, and you are going to help us remove it, and then we are going to leave and you can go back to your small, important lives. That's all. That's everything." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Vash's eyes moved across the floor, unhurried, cataloging. She saw the workers crouched behind the rails. She saw Sarek standing his ground with his arms spread and his plates flushed dark with fury. And she saw, last, the small human girl standing alone in the middle of the open floor, not hiding, with a gray band on her arm. Something in Vash's face changed. It softened into a kind of amused, terrible curiosity. "Oh," she said, "now what are you?" She walked toward Wren. The 2 heavy mercenaries drifted after her, and one of the tall, sinewy raiders raised a weapon that hummed with charge, and the whole floor seemed to hold its breath. Wren did not move. She let her shoulders round. She let her chin drop. She made her eyes go wide and wet and frightened, and none of it was entirely a lie, because a part of her was frightened, a small, clean human part that knew exactly how many ways this could still go wrong. Vash stopped in front of her and looked down, a full head and a half taller, and reached out one gloved finger and tapped the regulator on Wren's arm. "A sick one," Vash said, and laughed, low and delighted. "They sent a sick little animal to work the docks. What's wrong with you, small thing? What does the machine do? Keep your poor heart beating?" "Yes," Wren whispered. Her voice shook. She let it shake. "Please, please don't. I'll do whatever you—" "Of course you will." Vash straightened, satisfied, dismissing her. She had already looked away, already deciding the human was nothing, already turning to the mercenaries to give the order about the reactor. "Keep this one where I can see it," she said carelessly. "Fragile things make good manners. If anyone on this floor moves wrong," she gestured at Wren without looking, "the way you gesture at a hostage, we start with the one who can't run." And that, Wren would think later, was the moment. Not a moment of anger. She had trained too long and too hard to be moved by an insult. It was the moment the arithmetic finished. Because Vash had just told her, without meaning to, exactly where every weapon on the floor was pointed, exactly how the 9 of them were spaced, exactly which of them thought about the girl in the middle of the room, and which of them had already forgotten she existed. Vash had told her that they were going to take the reactor core, and Wren knew, because she had helped inventory it, because Sarek had walked her through the containment protocols on her 9th day, that the 4th-generation cell in the heart of Umber Reach could not be removed by people who did not know its failsafes, without a very real chance of a breach that would kill every living thing on the station, and leave a scar in the dark that ships would root around for 100 years. They were going to get everyone killed, not out of cruelty, out of ignorance and impatience which killed just as thoroughly. Wren stood in the red light with her chin down and her eyes wet and her heart slamming against the inside of the regulator, and she thought, very clearly, in the plain flat voice her mother had used the day the band first went on her arm. You wear it so the galaxy can sleep. But if the galaxy is about to die anyway, then the deal is already broken, and the only question left is what you do with the seconds you have. She had a great many seconds, far more than any of them knew. She let one more tear fall for the look of it, and under her breath, so quietly that not even Sarek 6 meters away could hear it, she began to count. The counting was not a nervous habit. It was a discipline, and it had been beaten into her, gently, patiently, but beaten in all the same, by a woman named Instructor Odell in a training hall on Earth that smelled of chalk and sweat and old rope. You are not fast because you are angry, Odell used to say, walking the line of teenagers who could each punch through a hull plate and each had to be taught before anything else never to. Anger is slow. Anger throws the whole self at one thing and leaves you empty everywhere else. You will be fast because you are calm, and you will be calm because you have already counted. Count the room. Count the exits. Count the ones who can hurt the people behind you. And then, only then, if you must move. So Wren counted the room. 9 raiders. 2 heavy worlders near the reactor corridor, 1 on each side of the hatch that Sarek was standing in front of. 4 of the tall, sinewy ones spread across the floor with charged weapons, 2 of them watching the crouched workers, 2 of them idly, boredly, watching nothing. 1 of the sinewy ones on the upper gantry, high, with a longer weapon, the marksman, the one who could reach any point on the floor before anyone below could reach him. And Vash, in the center, unarmed, turning away from Wren toward the reactor corridor with the easy confidence of a person who had never once in her life been surprised by a hostage. 40 workers, Sarek at the front, Aller somewhere on the concourse beyond the hatch off the floor out of the count for now. And 1 girl in the middle, with a gray band on her arm. Wren finished counting and did not move. That was the hardest part and the most important, and the thing that separated the ones who came home from the ones who did not. You counted, and then you waited, because the count was a photograph and the room was a river, and a smart person waited for the river to arrange itself into the shape the photograph had promised. She waited. The 2 heavy worlders started toward the reactor corridor with Vash. That was 2 of the 9 walking away from the floor, and toward the one thing that could kill everyone. The containment cell they did not know how to safely move. The marksman on the gantry tracked their backs, relaxing, because his leader was walking into the safe part of the operation. The 2 bored sinewy raiders drifted closer together to talk, their weapons drooping. The 2 watching the workers stayed sharp. They were the professionals, the ones who understood that a crowd was only harmless until it wasn't. The river was arranging itself. Wren let her frightened hostage posture sag another degree. Under the drooped line of her hair, her eyes had stopped being wet. They had gone flat and still, the way water goes still just before it freezes, and they moved once around the floor and settled on the reactor corridor, where Vash and the 2 heavy worlders were now stepping through the blast door. If they reached the cell, and if they did what raiders always did, which was rip the thing free without reading the failsafes. The station had, by Wren's estimate, somewhere between 4 and 9 minutes to live after that. Not enough time to evacuate 200 people from a station with 3 functioning lifeboats. So the choice, when it finally arrived, was not really a choice at all. The deal is broken, she thought. They broke it when they walked in here to kill everyone by accident. So she reached up with her right hand, calm as anything, and put 2 fingers against the regulator on her left arm. The band had a release. Every human wore one, and every human was taught the release, and every human was taught that using it outside a certified medical or command context was one of the gravest violations in the entire thin treaty structure that governed their people's presence among the stars. Remove the regulator without authorization, and you were, in the eyes of the assembly, a weapon that had drawn itself. There were humans who had done it. There were not many of them left free. Wren knew all of that. She had known it since she was 12. She thought about it for exactly as long as it took her fingers to find the recessed catch, which was not long, and then she thought about Sarek leaving a ration bar on the rail and calling it garbage, and she pressed the catch. The regulator did not come off cleanly, the way a bracelet comes off. It came off the way a splint comes off a limb that has forgotten how to be a limb, the way a hand comes off a throat. There was a soft double click, and the warm hum against her skin stopped, and then the pool drained. It happened between one heartbeat and the next. All her life on the station she had been wading, every step, every lift, every breath had been a wade through warm, resistant water, and she had grown so used to it that she had stopped feeling it as effort at all. Now the water was simply gone, all at once, everywhere, and she was standing on dry land in her own full weight for the first time in front of people who had never imagined it. And the sensation was so enormous and so total that she had to stand absolutely still for half a second just to hold it. The heavy gravity of Umber Reach, which she had performed straining against for 41 days, became nothing, less than nothing. It was a feather resting on her shoulders. The air, thick and processed, became a substance she could feel move. She could feel the eddies of it curling off the recyclers, feel the pressure change where a body 6 meters away displaced it. The red emergency light stopped flickering, because her eyes had simply gotten faster than the flicker, and now saw the light as the steady pulsing thing it actually was, on and off, slow as a tide. And sound. Sound came apart into its pieces. The hum of the recyclers, the tick of cooling metal, the too fast breathing of 40 terrified workers, the low confident voices of the raiders, all of it separated out, each thread distinct, and underneath all of it she could hear, from the reactor corridor, the specific and terrible sound of a heavy worlder's hands closing around a 4th-generation containment cell that they were about to pull free the wrong way. She had maybe 6 seconds before it mattered. She had, at her true speed, an eternity inside those 6 seconds. The gray regulator fell from her hand. In the low gravity of her own perception it seemed to drift, turning slowly, a small dull moon coming loose from an orbit it had held for years. It had not yet hit the deck. Wren moved. To the raiders, what happened next did not have an order. That was the thing they could never afterward reconstruct, the thing that made 3 of the survivors leave the trade entirely, and one of them stop speaking altogether. There was no sequence they could lay out. There was a girl standing frightened in the middle of the floor, and then the floor was a different place, and the difference had already finished happening before any of them had registered that it had begun. She took the marksman first. He was the greatest danger, high on the gantry, able to reach any point on the floor, and so he was first, and he never saw her cross the distance because there was no crossing to see. One instant the human was in the center of the floor, and the next she was on the gantry beside him, and she took the long weapon out of his hands the way you take a dangerous thing from a child, firmly, completely, without hurting him, and she folded the barrel of it into a shape that would never fire again, and set the ruined thing down. Then she gripped the back of his collar and lowered him, not through, lowered, with a care that was almost tender, off the gantry to the floor below, so that he would be out of the high position and unable to fall from it, and she left him sitting stunned and unharmed against a cargo rail with his mouth open. The gray regulator had not yet hit the deck. She took the two heavy worlders in the reactor corridor next, because they were the ones about to breach the cell. She was through the blast door before the sound of her arrival on the gantry had finished reaching the floor. One of them had the containment cell half out of its cradle. His fingers were on the manual release. There was a bloom of warning light already climbing the housing. Wren put her hand flat against the cell and pushed it back into its cradle. Gently, so gently, because a fourth-generation cell was the one thing in the room she could not afford to be strong with, and with her other hand she caught the heavy worlder's wrist and drew it back from the release, and he pulled against her with the full, furious power of a creature bred on a crushing world, and it was like a strong wind pulling against a mountain. He could not move his own arm. He stared at his own arm not moving, and then he stared at the girl holding it, and something in his face fell apart. The second heavy worlder swung at her. She let it come, watched the fist travel toward her through the thick, slow air, had time to note the scarring on the knuckles, the old break in the second finger, the whole biography of violence written into the hand. And at the last moment she simply was not where it was going to be, and she guided it past her and let the raider's own enormous strength carry him into the corridor wall. And she caught the back of his head an instant before it struck so that he hit the wall soft instead of hard. Because she did not want him dead, she wanted him stopped, and there was a universe of difference between the two, and she lived in that difference. Both heavy worlders were down and unbroken, and the containment cell was safe in its cradle with its warning light dimming, and the gray regulator had not yet hit the deck of the loading floor. She went back through the blast door. Vash was fast. This had to be said for her, and Wren said it to herself even in the middle of it, the way Instructor Odal had taught them to give the enemy their due even at speed. She is fast. Do not insult her by being careless. Vash had heard the wrongness of it, the marksman gone, the heavy worlders silenced, and in the time it took a normal person to feel confused, she had already drawn a blade from her back and turned toward the corridor and set her feet. And by the standards of every species in the assembly, she had reacted with superb, deadly, trained speed. By Wren's standards, she was standing still. Wren came out of the corridor and she did not attack Vash, because Vash was the leader, and a leader who is attacked becomes a martyr, and a leader who is simply, comprehensively, gently disarmed in front of her own people becomes something much more useful, which is a lesson. So Wren took the blade out of Vash's hand, the elegant, expensive used blade, and she took the second, smaller blade from Vash's hip that Vash had not even reached for yet, and she took the charge pistol from the holster at the small of Vash's back that Vash had been saving, and she did all of this in the space of a single one of Vash's heartbeats. And then she stepped back and stood in front of the raider leader with all three of her weapons held loosely in one hand. Vash's hand was still closing on the space where the blade had been. The raider looked at her empty hand. She looked at the weapons in the human's grip. She looked at last at the human's face, the small girl she had tapped on the arm and called a sick little animal, and Wren watched the arithmetic happen behind Vash's eyes, watched her count the room the way Wren had counted it, and arrive at the only possible sum. The four sinewy raiders on the floor were still turning toward the disturbance. Their weapons were coming up. They had not yet understood. And the gray regulator, at last, finished its long, slow fall and touched the deck of the loading floor with a small, flat click that was, in the enormous stretched silence of Wren's perception, the loudest sound in the room. That click was the starting gun for everyone else. It was the moment the river caught up to the photograph. It was the moment the raiders' slow, ordinary minds finally registered that something had gone catastrophically wrong, and their weapons came up the rest of the way, and their fingers found the triggers, and 40 workers screamed, and Sarek roared, and the whole frozen floor came alive at once. And Wren was already standing among the 4 sinewy raiders, in the middle of them, with their leader disarmed behind her, and their weapons pointed at the places she had just left. There is a thing that happens to a fight when one participant is operating on a different clock, and it is not what stories usually pretend. Stories pretend it is a blur, a whirlwind, a storm of motion. It is the opposite. To Wren, standing among the 4 sinewy raiders, everything was slow and clear and almost peaceful, and the only blur in the room was the raiders themselves, whose bodies kept trying to do things their minds had not finished deciding. The first one fired. She saw the charge gather in the weapon's throat, saw the muzzle drift toward the workers behind her, not toward her, toward the crowd, because he had already lost track of where she was and was falling back on the raider's oldest reflex, which was to make the hostages pay for the confusion. She was between the muzzle and the workers before the bolt released. She did not block it with her body, which would have been dramatic and stupid. She closed her hand over the weapon's emitter, and the bolt discharged into her palm, and it stung. A bright hot sting like pressing your hand to a stove, and that was all it was, because a human hand and a human will are 2 of the most durable things the galaxy has ever produced, and the raiders had never been told. The weapon cracked in her grip and went dark. The second and third fired at where she had been standing a quarter second ago, which meant they fired at each other's general direction across the space she had already vacated, and she reached out as she passed between them and tilted each of their weapons a few degrees. Just a few, just enough, so that the bolts went wide into cargo containers instead of into flesh, and she plucked the weapons from their hands on the way through and let them fall. The fourth one did the smartest thing any of them did that day. He dropped his weapon and ran. Wren let him. That too was a discipline. You did not chase the ones who chose to stop being a threat, because chasing was for predators and she was not there to be a predator, she was there to be a wall. He ran for the hatch, and one of the heavy worlder guards there, the ones flanking Sarek, grabbed for him in confusion, and the 2 of them tangled and went down in a heap. And that was 2 more threats removed by their own panic without Wren having to touch either of them, which was the most elegant kind of victory there was. She stood in the center of the loading floor. 9 raiders had come through the hatch. In the time it had taken a small, dull band of metal to fall from her hand to the deck, she had unmade the entire operation, and she had done it without killing a single one of them, and the containment cell at the heart of the station sat safe and cooling in its cradle, and 200 people who had not known how close they came would go on not knowing for the rest of their lives. The floor was silent again, a different silence than before. 40 workers stared at her from behind the cargo rails. The disarmed raiders sat and lay where she had left them, unhurt and utterly undone, staring at their own hands. And Vash stood behind her, weaponless, breathing hard, staring at the back of the human girl who had taken everything from her without leaving a mark. Wren turned around slowly, because sudden movement was cruel to people who were already this frightened, and she held up her hands, empty now, the 3 confiscated weapons set down neatly on a cargo rail, and she said, in a voice that was steady and quiet and pitched to carry to every corner of the floor, "It's over. Nobody else is going to be hurt. That includes them." She nodded at the fallen raiders. "That includes all of them. It's over." And then, because she was 17, and because the water was gone and the world was too loud and too bright and too fast, and she had just broken the single largest promise her entire species had made to the galaxy, her hands began to shake. Sarek reached her first. He came across the floor at his slow Grell run, all 4 arms out, and he stopped in front of her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. He was looking at her the way you look at a landscape after a flood has receded, recognizing everything, and understanding that all of it has changed. "The arm," he said finally. His voice was very rough. "Yeah," Wren said. She looked down at the gray band lying on the deck between them, small and dull and harmless. "The arm." Sarek looked at the band. He looked at the 4 disarmed raiders. He looked at the human girl who came up to the middle of his chest and who had, 41 days ago, performed a small strained puff of breath while lifting a container that he now understood she could have thrown across the station. "You let me leave you food," he said, "and call it garbage." "You needed to," Wren said. "It made you feel like you were taking care of somebody. I didn't want to take that away from you." She swallowed. "You were the only one who was honest with me. I didn't want to lie to you more than I had to." The Grell was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached down with one of his 4 huge hands and very carefully closed it around her shaking one, engulfing it completely, gray plate around trembling fingers. And he held it, not tightly, just held it, the way you hold something to remind it that it is not alone. "Then stop lying now," he said gruffly. "You are not garbage either. Sit down before you fall down." And Wren, who could have held up the ceiling of the station on her 2 hands, sat down on the deck because a boulder-shaped alien with a bad temper told her to, and let him keep her hand held in his and shook, and did not have to pretend about any part of it. They should have been safe then. In a fair universe they would have been. But the universe that Wren had grown up in was not fair. It was only survivable, and she had learned to keep counting even after the fight was over, because the fight being over was exactly when careless people died. So she was still counting when she felt it, the same subtle wrongness she had felt before, the shift in the air, the reroute of power. Another ship. She was on her feet before the others felt anything. Sarek, her voice had changed. It had gone flat and cold, the water before freezing voice. "There's another ship docking, a big one. Where's your security detail?" Sarek's plates darkened. "Dead or locked down," he said. "The Thorn hit the security office first. Standard." He looked toward the hatch. "Another ship, you think more of them?" "No," Wren said, and she did not know how she knew except that she had spent her whole life listening for the difference between one kind of danger and another, and this new pressure in the deck had a different rhythm than the Thorns had. Heavier, more disciplined, fewer feet moving in perfect unison. Not more of them, worse than them. The hatch opened, and she found out how much worse. They came in like a machine because in every way that mattered they were one. 8 figures in matte black armor sealed head to foot, moving in a single interlocked formation, each covering the other's angles, no wasted motion, no talk. Their weapons were not the mismatched charge guns of the Thorn. They were identical, expensive, military. And across the chest of each suit was a symbol Wren did not recognize, but that Sarek clearly did. Because the moment he saw it, he made a sound low in his chest that she had never heard a Grell make before. A sound that in any species would have translated as asterisk oh no. "Wardens," he breathed. "Assembly wardens, compliance division." Wren's stomach turned to ice. She knew what compliance meant. Every human knew what compliance meant. It was the word on the paperwork. It was the word engraved on the inside of the regulator now lying on the deck. Compliance division were the ones who enforced the thin treaty that governed her people, and the single gravest violation of that treaty, the one act that brought them running from across the sector faster than any distress call, was a human removing a regulator without authorization. They had not come for the Thorn. They had come for her. The lead warden stepped forward, and its suit speaker addressed the room in a flat synthetic voice that had been stripped of anything that might be mistaken for a feeling. "This station registered an unauthorized regulator deactivation 4 minutes ago," it said. "Assembly compliance responds to all such events without exception. All personnel will stand clear of the deactivated human. The human will remain still and will not be addressed. Interference with a compliance action is a capital matter." The wardens fanned out across the floor with their identical weapons, and every single one of those weapons came to rest, without hesitation, without a flicker of the Thorn's confusion, on the small human girl standing in the center of the room. They had not looked at the disarmed raiders. They had not looked at the crippled reactor breach that had been stopped inches from killing everyone. They had come through the door already knowing exactly what they were there to do, and it had nothing to do with saving anyone. It had to do with a girl who had taken off a band of metal. Wren looked at the 8 weapons pointed at her. She looked at the workers behind the cargo rails, who had just watched her save their lives and were now watching the law arrive to punish her for it. She looked at Sarek, whose 4 arms had come up again, whose plates were dark with a fury that had nowhere to go. Because you did not fight assembly wardens. You did not. Nobody did. It was the kind of thing that got a whole station's population declared complicit. And Wren understood, with the flat clarity that the drained water gave her, that this was the real test. Not the thorn. The thorn had been raiders. She had known exactly what to do with raiders. This was the thing she had been raised her whole life to fear more than any raider. The moment the galaxy decided she was the danger, and came, in good conscience and full legal authority, to deal with her as one. Count the room, said Odal's voice in her memory. Count the exits. Count the ones who can hurt the people behind you. She counted. 8 wardens. Full military armor, sealed, disciplined. No gaps she could exploit gently. Weapons that would not be tilted a few degrees aside. These were people who fired where they aimed and aimed where they meant. And behind her, 40 workers and a reactor and 200 lives, and every one of them would be counted interference. The moment the shooting started, and the warden's flat synthetic voice had already told her the penalty for interference. She could fight them. That was the terrible truth sitting in the center of the count. She was faster than they were and stronger than they were, and she could probably take all 8 of them the way she had taken the thorn, without killing them, if everything went perfectly. But it would not go perfectly, because they were not the thorn. They were disciplined, and disciplined enemies did not panic and shoot each other. Disciplined enemies, when they lost track of a target, fell back to protocol. And the protocol for a compliance action that went wrong was to stop aiming at the human and start aiming at everything the human was protecting. She had seen it in the Thorn Raider's oldest reflex, make the hostages pay for the confusion, and the wardens would do it not out of panic but out of doctrine, coldly, as leverage. The moment she moved on them, 40 workers became hostages of the law, which meant the one thing she could not do, the thing every muscle in her unbound body was screaming to do, was fight. The lead warden's weapon leveled at her chest. "Deactivated human," it said. "You will lie face down on the deck with your hands away from your body. You have removed a compliance device in a populated station. Under Assembly Interspecies Statute you are classified as of this moment as an uncontained hazard. Comply and this station is spared a hazard containment protocol. Refuse, and every individual present is reclassified as sheltering one." A pause, flat and final. "You have 5 seconds. And Wren Calloway, the strongest person in the room by a margin none of them could imagine, slowly went down onto her knees on the cold deck of the loading floor, and put her hands out where they could see them, and understood that the hardest thing her strength had ever been asked to do was to not use it. She knelt. The deck was cold through the knees of her work trousers. The gray regulator lay an arm's length away, and one of the wardens moved to retrieve it, sealing it into a containment case with the reverent care of a creature handling live ordnance. Another warden produced a second device, heavier than the first, black instead of gray, ringed with hardpoints, and Wren understood that this was not a regulator. This was a restraint. The thing they put on a human, they had decided, was no longer to be trusted with the freedom of her own body. Once it went on, the paperwork said, it did not come off by any release she could reach. Once it went on, she would be cargo. "Do not resist the containment fitting," the lead warden said. "Resistance will be recorded as a second violation." Wren held very still and let them come. And that was when Sarek stepped between her and the wardens. He did it slowly, which was the only reason they did not fire. He moved the way you move around startled animals, hands visible, no sudden motion, and he planted his four-armed bulk directly in the line between the lead warden's weapon and the kneeling girl, and he said, in his low, grinding voice, with the whole weight of his people's stubbornness behind it, "No, Grell citizen," the warden said, "step aside. You are interfering with a compliance action. This is your only warning." "No," Sarek said again. He did not raise his voice. He did not spread his arms in threat. He simply stood, immovable as the boulder he resembled, and he said, "You will hear what happened on this floor before you put your chain on her. That is not interference. That is testimony. Your own statutes require you to take it. I have read them. Have you?" There was a pause. It was a small pause, but Wren, on her different clock, felt it stretch, and she understood that inside that pause the warden was doing something wardens were not supposed to have to do, which was think. "Testimony is recorded after containment," the warden said, "not before. The hazard is stabilized first." "The hazard," Sarek said, "just saved your reactor." He turned his heavy head slowly and looked around the floor, and one by one the workers understood what he was doing and what it would cost, and one by one, terrifyingly, they began to stand up. Aller first, the Asani dockmaster, unfolding his long pale limbs from behind a cargo rail where he had crawled after the thorn cut the channel, his enormous eyes wet. Then a cluster of Velthai, their wing cases rattling with fear, standing anyway. Then the grell of Sarek's shift, and a knot of the low-armored ones, and the reed-limbed Asani, until 40 workers of 6 species were on their feet in the red light, unarmed, terrified, standing in a loose ring around a kneeling human girl, and the 8 armored wardens who had come to take her. "You will all sit down," the lead warden said, and for the first time the flat synthetic voice had something underneath it that was almost strain. "You are reclassifying yourselves as—" "As what?" said Aller, and his voice shook, but it did not stop. "As people who saw the truth and said it out loud. Then reclassify us. Reclassify all of us. I am the dockmaster of this station, and I am telling you what I saw. And if telling you what I saw makes me a hazard too, then your law is broken, and I would rather be broken with her than whole with you." The lead warden's weapon did not waver from Wren's chest, but it did not fire either. And into that silence from the side of the floor came a voice nobody expected. "She could have killed me," said Vash. The raider leader was still standing where Wren had left her, disarmed, her people scattered and stunned around her, and she was looking at the wardens with an expression that was hard to read on a face built so differently from a human's, but that Wren recognized anyway, because it was the look of someone who has been shown something they cannot unsee. "I have taken 30 stations," Vash said. Her voice through the translator was low and even. "I have killed to take some of them. I know exactly what a person does when they have the power to end you and they choose how to use it. This one," she nodded at Wren, kneeling on the deck, "had my throat in her hand for the length of a heartbeat and every one of my crew's throats, and she gave them all back. She put my people down like she was tucking them in. Not one of them is dead. Not one of them is even bleeding." She laughed, a short broken sound. "I came here to steal your reactor, and I could not have done more damage than I was about to do by accident, and she stopped that too. So take your chain and put it on her if your law says you must. But do not stand on my floor and call her a hazard, because I am the hazard. I am what a real hazard looks like, and she is the only reason your hazard is still breathing." The lead warden turned its blank helmet toward Vash, then toward Sarek, then toward the ring of standing workers, then at last down toward the girl on her knees. "Deactivated human," it said. "You will speak. Why did you remove the regulator?" Wren lifted her head. She looked up at the 8 armored figures, and past them at the ring of frightened people who had stood up for her, and she thought about her mother's dry eyes and shaking hand the day she signed the labor exchange. And she thought about Instructor Oda walking the line of teenagers who could each punch through a hull, teaching them first and above all things never to. Because the deal was already broken, she said. Her voice was quiet, but the floor was silent and it carried. You know the deal, she said to the wardens. You enforce it. We wear the band so the galaxy can sleep. We make ourselves small so you don't have to be afraid of us. That's the whole arrangement, and it's a good arrangement, and I have kept it every single day of my life since I was 12 years old because I understand why it exists. I understand that you're afraid of us. I understand you have a right to be. She drew a breath. But the arrangement is that we stay small so that nobody gets hurt. That's the point of it. That's the only point of it. And this morning, people came onto this station to take something that was going to get everyone here killed. Not on purpose. That's the part your law can't see. They were going to kill 200 people out of pure ignorance, and there wasn't going to be time to stop it any way but one. She held up her bare left arm, where the pale band of skin still showed, where the regulator had sat for 41 days. So I had a choice, she said. I could keep the deal and let 200 people die keeping it, or I could break it for 90 seconds to make sure nobody died at all, and then kneel down on this deck and hand myself to you and answer for it. Those were the choices. There wasn't a third one. And I want you to understand. Her voice did not rise, but it hardened, and the hardness in it was the hardness of something that had been decided a long time ago and would not be undecided now. That if you rewound this morning and made me choose again, right now, in front of all of them, I would take the band off again. Every time. I would take it off every single time because the whole reason I ever put it on was so that people wouldn't die, and a band that makes me watch people die is not the deal. It's the opposite of the deal. And I think if your law can't tell the difference between those two things, then your law needs to kneel down and answer some questions of its own. The silence after she finished was so complete that Wren could hear the reactor cooling 3 corridors away. The lead warden stood motionless, its weapon still pointed at her chest, but its finger, she saw, she was close enough and fast enough to see everything. Its finger had come off the trigger and lay along the guard. You are aware, the warden said slowly, that under statute intent is not a defense. The device was removed. The classification is automatic. There is no clause for a pause for why. I know, Wren said. That's what I'm telling you there should be. She looked up at the blank helmet, and something in her 17-year-old face was suddenly very old. You built a law that treats taking the band off as the crime, no matter what happens next, but the band was never the point. The point was always the people. And you've been guarding the band so long you forgot what it was for. I didn't. That's the only difference between us. I remembered what it was for. The warden did not answer at once. When it did, its voice had changed, not softened exactly but slowed, as if it were reading from somewhere new. Compliance protocol permits a field commander, it said, to suspend automatic classification pending review in cases where, it seemed almost to hesitate over the words, where the deactivating individual has demonstrably acted to preserve assembly life and voluntarily resubmits to containment. The clause has never been invoked. A pause. It has never been invoked because no deactivated human has ever voluntarily knelt down and waited. Wren went very still. They always run, the warden said, every prior case. The device comes off and the human runs because they know what we are and what we do, and they use the freedom to escape. That is the entire history of this statute. That is why the classification is automatic. We built a law for people who run. The blank helmet tilted, studying her. You did not run. You had removed the device. You were faster than us and stronger than us. I have reviewed the recording of what you did to the raiders. I understand now what you are. I understand that this entire room, including my unit, exists at your discretion. And instead of running, you knelt down on the deck and put your hands where we could see them, and you waited to answer for it. Yes, Wren said. Why? And Wren Calloway, kneeling on the cold deck with 8 weapons still half raised around her, gave the answer that she would give in one form or another, for the rest of a life that would turn out to be far longer and far stranger than she could have guessed in that moment. Because running would have proven you right, she said. Running would have said the band was the only thing making me safe. And it isn't, it never was. The thing that makes me safe is me. It's the choice I make every morning, band or no band, to be a wall instead of a weapon. The band was just you not trusting me to make it. She lifted her chin. So I made it, in front of you, with the band off and nothing stopping me and every reason in the galaxy to run. I made the choice, and then I knelt down so that you would have to watch me make it and know it was real. That's why I'm still here. I stayed so you'd have to see. The lead warden lowered its weapon. It was a small motion, the muzzle dropping from Wren's chest to the deck, but on the loading floor of Umber Reach it landed like the fall of something enormous. Around the ring, 40 workers let out a breath they had been holding so long that it came out as a single ragged sound, almost a sob. "Field Commander," the warden said, and it was addressing itself, Wren realized, speaking the words of the protocol aloud to make them real, the way Sarek had spoken his refusal aloud, the way she had spoken her own choice aloud, because some things do not count until they are said where witnesses can hear them. Field Commander suspends automatic classification, cause, preservation of assembly life and voluntary resubmission, pending review by. The klaxon cut it off. It came from the reactor corridor, a hard, flat tone Wren had never heard on the station and did not need anyone to translate, because there is a sound that machines make when they are about to stop being machines and become explosions, and it is the same sound in every language there has ever been. Red light flooded the corridor mouth, brighter than the emergency red, a violent pulsing crimson, and the deck beneath them all changed its hum to a rising whine. Sarek was already turning. "The cell," he said, "the containment cell." "It's the cradle," Wren said. She was on her feet. She had heard it before the klaxon, had heard the specific wrong note in the reactor's song a full second before the machines admitted it. When they pulled it half out, they cracked the seating. It receded, but the cracks spreading. "The cell's fine, the cell's stable, but the cradle's going to let go of it, and if it drops out of the magnetic bottle." She did not finish. She did not need to. Sarek's plates went the color of ash. "How long?" the lead warden said. All its flatness was gone. Whatever it had come here to be. In this moment, it was simply another creature on a station about to die, and it asked the question the way any of them would have. "For you," Wren said, "not long enough." And she was gone. Later, the recording from the reactor corridor's single functioning sensor would be studied by people whose whole lives were the study of such things, and none of them would fully believe it, and the ones who had been on the floor would only shrug, because they had stopped being surprised somewhere around the moment. A 17-year-old girl became the fastest thing in the sector. Here is what the sensor saw. The containment cell, a cylinder of dense alloy the length of a Grell's arm, holding inside its magnetic bottle a sliver of matter that wanted very badly to be a sun, was sinking. The cracked cradle had given up one of its 3 anchors, and the cell was tilting, sliding, the magnetic bottle straining as its housing lost alignment. And in 11 seconds, by the station's own count, the bottle would lose containment, and the sliver of almost sun would touch the walls of a machine that could not hold it. And Umber Reach and everyone aboard would become a brief bright point in the dark that ships would root around for 100 years. The girl arrived in the corridor before the cell finished its first degree of tilt. She could not be strong with it. That was the thing the sensor could not capture, and the thing that mattered most, that the entire crisis was a crisis of restraint, that the one object in the station she could not simply grab and crush and haul was the one object she now had to save. A 4th-generation cell was a held breath. Squeeze it, jar it, misalign it a hair, and it breached exactly as surely as if you dropped it. She had to catch a falling star without letting her fingers close. So she did not catch it, she got underneath it. She put her back against the base of the crippled cradle and her hands flat against the underside of the housing, spreading the load across her whole palms, and she took the weight of the cell and the failing cradle both, a mass that would have driven a heavy worlder through the deck plating, and she held it exactly where it needed to be, not up, not down, still, dead still, the way you hold a level full of water, while the magnetic bottle inside settled back toward true. The whine of the reactor climbed, and then, grudgingly, began to fall. But holding it still was not saving it. The cradle was still cracking. She could feel the fracture spreading through the metal against her spine, feel it in the soles of her feet, a slow tearing that in seconds would take the other two anchors and drop the whole assembly. Holding the cell in place bought minutes. It did not buy the future, and she could not let go to fix the cradle, because the instant she let go the cell would fall. "Sarek," she called, not a shout, but pitched to carry, calm, the water before freezing calm. "I need the number 4 fusing torch off the maintenance rail, and I need it in 11 seconds, and I cannot come and get it. Sarek." And the Grell, who could not run faster than he could run, ran faster than he ever had, and got the torch off the rail, and came into the crimson corridor where a human girl was holding a star on her 2 flat hands, and he did not ask her how, and he did not stare, because there was no time for awe when someone you had decided to protect needed a tool. He put the torch in the crook of her elbow because both her hands were full of the future. "Weld the anchor," she said. Her voice did not shake now. "The far one, the intact one, weld it to the cradle base so it can't walk loose when the crack reaches it. You've welded 1,000 seams. Weld this one. I cannot see past you. Then I'll move for you." And she shifted a hair, a hand's width, redistributing the impossible weight across her arms so that Sarek could reach the anchor, holding the cell true through the shift by feel alone, by an animal sense of balance grown on a world that killed anything that lost its footing. And Sarek welded the anchor, 4 arms steady, the torch throwing white sparks across both their faces, and the far anchor bit deep and held, and it was enough. 2 anchors and a girl. It was enough to hold until the emergency dampers, roused at last by the crisis, flooded the bottle with a secondary field, and the cell went quiet and safe and cold in its cradle. The wine died. The crimson light faded back to ordinary emergency red. The reactor of Umber Reach settled into its old song like nothing had happened, and would go on singing it for another 40 years, and the 200 people who lived because of the next 11 seconds would never know how close the dark had come. Wren took her hands off the housing, slowly, making sure. Then she stepped out from under the cradle, and her legs held her barely, and she turned around and found the entire loading floor standing in the mouth of the corridor watching her, 40 workers and a raider leader, and 8 assembly wardens, and not one of them was pointing a weapon at anything. The awe, when it finally came, did not come as a roar. Wren had half braced for a roar, some crowd sound, some acclamation. It came instead as silence, which was worse and truer. 200 years later, historians of the human question would write that the change began not with a battle, but with the way a room full of aliens went quiet when a girl walked out from under a star, and they would be closer to right than they knew. The lead warden was the first to move. It reached up, unsealed its helmet, and lifted it off, a thing wardens did not do in the field, a thing that was itself a kind of testimony, and revealed the face beneath, an old Asani face, its huge eyes fixed on the human girl with an expression that had traveled a very long way past fear and come out the other side into something that did not have a good name. "I have enforced this statute," the warden said, "for 60 years. I have fitted the containment restraint onto 19 deactivated humans. I told myself each time that I was protecting the galaxy from a hazard." Its voice was very quiet. "I watched you hold the reactor. I watched you ask the Grell for a torch instead of tearing the cradle apart with your hands, because tearing it apart would have breached the cell, and you knew that in the middle of it at that speed, you knew the difference between the strength that saves and the strength that destroys, and you chose. 19 times I have chained your people for taking off the band. Not once did I ask what any of them chose to do after. I only ever asked whether the band was on." It drew a slow breath. I built my whole life around guarding the band, and you are right. The band was never the point. You are the point. You were always the point, and I could not see it, because I was so afraid of what you might do that I never once looked at what you actually did. It knelt. An assembly warden, on the deck of a nothing station at the edge of the Raider lanes, went down on one knee in front of a 17-year-old human girl, and set its helmet on the deck beside it, and the other 7 wardens, after a frozen moment, did the same, 8 armored figures kneeling in a ring where they had come to force a girl to kneel. And Sarek made a low sound in his chest that this time translated, unmistakably, as pride. "Don't," Wren said, her voice cracked. She was 17, and she was exhausted, and the water was gone, and the world was too loud, and the last thing she had wanted from any of this was for anyone to kneel. "Please don't. That's the whole thing, don't you see? That's the whole thing I've been trying to say. I don't want you on your knees. I don't want to be feared, and I don't want to be worshipped. Those are the same thing. They're both just you not looking at me. I want—" She stopped. She looked around the ring, at the workers, at Sarek, at the Raider Vash, at the kneeling Law. "I want to be trusted. That's all. That's the only thing any of us ever wanted. Trust us enough to let us make the choice, and then watch us make it, and then trust us a little more. That's it. That's the whole deal I actually want. Please get up." They got up. The reckoning that followed took longer than the day and reached farther than the station, and Wren was at the center of only the beginning of it. Vash and the surviving Thorn were taken into custody by the wardens, who found in themselves a new and unaccustomed thoroughness about distinguishing the people who set out to do harm from the people who set out to prevent it. The lead warden, its name, it turned out, was Halcyon, filed a report that was less a report than a resignation from an entire way of seeing the galaxy, and it invoked the never-invoked clause, and Wren Calloway walked off Umber Reach not in a containment restraint but as a free person, with her deactivated regulator returned to her in its case, and the choice of whether to wear it left, for the first time in the history of the statute, to her. She wore it. That surprised people later, when the story spread, when the review became a hearing, and the hearing became a reckoning that ran all the way up to the chambers where the thin human treaty had been written. They expected the girl who had proven she did not need the band to throw it in the sea. But Wren put it back on her arm, and when they asked her why, she said the thing that would end up carved, eventually, over the doors of a building she never lived to see. "Because now it means something different. Before, I wore it because you made me. Now I wear it because I choose to, and the day I decide the deal is broken again, I'll take it off again, and you know that now, and I know that you know it. That's not a leash anymore. That's a promise, and a promise only means anything if the person making it could break it and doesn't. I'll wear it as long as it stays a promise. The first day it goes back to being a leash, it comes off for good." She smiled, tired and 17 and unafraid. "So keep it a promise. That part's up to you." The hours after did not feel like victory. Victory, Wren had learned young, was a story people told later. In the moment itself there was only the shaking, and the exhaustion, and the strange grief that came whenever she took the band off, and the world went too loud. Because a world that loud was a world where you could hear everything you were about to lose. She spent the first of those hours doing the smallest possible things. She helped Aller reset the docking clamps the Thorn had jammed. She carried the marksman she had lowered off the gantry, who had a bruised spine and a shattered sense of the universe but nothing worse, to the station's small infirmary, and she did it gently, and he flinched the whole way, and she let him flinch, because a person was allowed to be afraid of the thing that had unmade them in a quarter-second, even if that thing was now carrying him to safety. She reseated a cargo rail that had been knocked loose. She swept up a spill. She made herself, deliberately, ordinary, because ordinary was the thing they needed to see now more than any more displays of what she could do. They had seen enough of what she could do. What they had never seen, what no one had ever let them see, was a human who could do all of that and then pick up a broom. Halcyon found her there, kneeling to sweep, its helmet off, its old Asani eyes following her hands. "You could have killed my entire unit," the warden said. It did not say it as an accusation. It said it the way a person turns over a stone they cannot stop turning over. "In the corridor, when the reactor was failing and we could do nothing, you could have let it fail and walked out through the wreck of us, and no law in the assembly could have touched what was left. Instead, you asked the Grell for a torch." "I know," Wren said. She did not stop sweeping. "I keep telling everyone that's the whole point. The thing you were afraid of was never that I could kill you. Of course I could kill you. Any human could, that's why the bands exist. The thing you never asked was whether I would. And the answer is no. The answer was always no. You just built a law that never once bothered to ask the question because it was easier to chain the ones who could than to trust the ones who wouldn't." She looked up at last. "It's not easier for us, though, you know that, wearing it. Being the thing everybody's relieved to be stronger than. It's not easy, we do it anyway. That should have counted for something a long time ago." Halcyon was quiet for a while. Then it lowered itself, joints creaking, and picked up a second brush from the rack and began, awkwardly unpracticed, to sweep beside her. It did not say anything else. It did not need to. Sometimes the only apology large enough for 60 years is to kneel down in the dust beside the person you wronged and do the small work with them. And Wren understood that. And she let the old warden sweep. And the two of them cleared the loading floor together in a silence that was, for the first time all day, entirely without fear. She thought about her mother that night, in the narrow bunk they gave her, with the band back on her arm and the world gone soft and quiet again around her dulled senses. She thought about the kitchen on Earth, and the way her mother's hands had shaken signing the labor exchange, and how her mother had not cried. Her mother never cried. Her mother came from a long line of women who had learned that crying was a luxury for worlds that could afford it, but had instead sat Wren down and said the plainest, hardest thing anyone had ever said to her. "They're going to think you're weak," her mother had said. "The whole galaxy is going to look at you and see something small and breakable, and they are going to be kind to you the way you're kind to a thing you pity, and it is going to make you so angry, Wren. Some days it is going to make you want to show them. And you can't. Do you understand me? You wear the band and you let them be wrong about you, because the day you show them, even once, even to save your own pride, you make it harder for every human who comes after. Their fear of us is the only wall between us and a war we would win and never survive winning." She had held Wren's face in both her shaking hands. "So be strong enough to be thought weak. That's the hardest strength there is. That's the one I need you to have." And Wren had had it. For 5 years she had had it every single day, through every kindness that felt like an insult and every insult that came dressed as kindness. She had been strong enough to be thought weak, and it had been the hardest thing, exactly as her mother promised. But her mother had been wrong about one thing, and Wren understood it now, lying in the dark with the reactor humming its safe old song 3 corridors away. Her mother had thought the choice was between showing them and hiding from them. She had thought those were the only 2 doors, and there had turned out to be a 3rd door, and Wren had walked through it today without knowing it was there until she was already on the other side. The 3rd door was to show them, and then to stay, to take off the band in front of the whole watching galaxy, to be, for 90 seconds, everything they had ever feared, and then to kneel down on the deck and put your hands where they could see them and wait to answer for it. Not to hide your strength, and not to flee with it, but to reveal it completely and then hand yourself back, so that they had to look at the full truth of what you were and the full truth of what you chose, both at once, in the same person, in the same breath, so that they could never again pretend the band was what made you safe, and never again pretend that without the band you were only a weapon. So that they had to hold the whole impossible truth of a human in their heads at the same time and find, to their astonishment, that it did not explode. That was not showing them, and it was not hiding. It was trusting them to see. It was the door her mother had never found because her mother's galaxy had never once given her a reason to believe the door would open. Wren had gambled that it would. It had. Barely, and only because a grell with a bad temper had stood in front of a weapon and said *no, and a raider had told the truth against her own interest, and 40 frightened people had stood up when standing up could have killed them, but it had opened. She would send her mother a message, she decided, a long one. It would take weeks to reach Earth, and her mother would read it standing at the kitchen counter with her shaking hands, and Wren would tell her, "You were right, it was the hardest strength there is, and I had it. And then I found a harder one. I found the strength to let them see and stay. And it worked, Mama. It worked. The wall between us and them doesn't have to be their fear. It can be their trust. It's slower to build, and it breaks easier, and it costs more every single day. But it's a wall you can live on both sides of, and their fear never was." She fell asleep composing it, and slept without dreaming, which she had not done in a long time. Sarek walked her to the transport when the assembly's ship came for her at last, 4 arms crossed, grumbling the whole way about how she was leaving before her shift rotation ended, and how typical that was of a fragile little thing who couldn't handle honest work. She let him grumble. She understood exactly what it was, and so did he, and neither of them said the true thing because they had never needed to. At the hatch she stopped and looked up at him, the boulder-shaped alien with the bad temper who had known what she was on her second day, and had decided, for reasons of his own, to leave a ration bar on the rail and call it garbage rather than let her be alone. "You were the only one who saw me before I took it off," she said. "Everybody else only saw me after. You saw me the whole time." "I saw a thing that moved wrong for a weak thing," Sarek said gruffly. "And then I decided I didn't care what it moved like, because it took my food and looked ashamed instead of proud, and proud things don't look ashamed when you feed them. Only kind things do." He put one enormous hand on the top of her head, briefly, the way you might steady something precious that you were about to let go of. "Go on, small one, go be trusted. Come back and tell me if it's everything you wanted." Wren Calloway went aboard the ship, and the hatch closed, and Umber Reach fell away behind her into the dark. A nothing station at the edge of the lanes where, on one ordinary morning, the weakest human in everyone's eyes had reached up with 2 fingers and taken off the device that was holding her back, and had shown a watching galaxy that the thing it had been so afraid of all along was not her strength, but the possibility that she would use it exactly as she chose, and that the choice, every single time, when it counted, when 200 lives hung on it and there was nothing in the universe left to stop her, would be to hold the star and not the throat, to be the wall and not the weapon, to kneel down after and stay, so that they would have to see it was real. She was, they would say afterward, the weakest human in their eyes, until she wasn't, until she showed them that the band had never been the thing keeping them safe. She had been all along.